Lights along a distant road thread past like insects who have learned to keep to their lane. The present is not unwelcome here. It is simply asked to lower its horns at the gate. A plane draws a dashed line between constellations and does not apologize. A satellite moves with the arrogance of precision and is forgiven because it is trying to be useful. Someone in the group describes, quietly, a measure taken earlier that day, how much saliva a timed conversation produces. How much light a plant can bear before it stops calling itself plant and begins to call itself complaint. Everyone laughs the kind of laugh that does not damage the air. The world contains many odd accountings. This one counts ages. Memory mixes eras without spilling. The group imagines the prehistoric circle of hands that shaped this place. They picture the toddler allowed near the rim only under the supervision of a stern grandmother, who had learned from her grandmother where fear ends and instruction begins. They picture the uncounted kneelings before an offering, a stone turned 3 times, a look sent skyward and returned with a gentleness that meant the look had been received. They picture the small griefs turned to quiet through repetition. A name said again. A name said until the whole had learned it perfectly and agreed to keep it. They also picture the not long ago gathering of volunteers with trowels and brushes and string lines, measuring squares onto the earth like windows being opened and then remembered to be closed. The careful placement of a bag around one unassuming bead. The pencil label that would later look like a miracle because somebody's handwriting had chosen to be legible that day. They picture the late afternoon when one of them, no one can remember who, stood and took the dust from their knees and looked out at the field and said a sentence that made everyone else stop and breathe because they recognized a good sentence even before it knew itself. The sentence is lost now. The feeling remains. Feelings are better archivists in certain climates. There is a kind of modern tiredness that comes from carrying too much world too tightly. It loosens here. The whole is useful to the present for this reason most of all. It knows how to hold gravity for us without reminding us of falling. Backpack straps seem to lengthen of their own accord and sit more kindly on the shoulders that must carry them back to a car, and from there to a bed, and from there to another morning. A photograph is finally taken. The lens chooses the one stone. That prefers portraits, and the one tuft of grass that does not behave for cameras, but agrees to be decorum for this one frame. The shutter is quieter than crows, and therefore allowed. A child yawns the kind of yawn that contains both bread and stargazing. Parents' red yawn is chronometer, and gather what was set down. The field guide, the scarf, the sweet wrapper folded. Exactly in thirds. The group drifts along the path to a place where the plane chooses to kneel into a little basin, and there they sit, not because any sign has told them to, but because backs that are ready for sitting are excellent at finding ground that has been waiting for sitting. The thermos is passed, and tongues discover that tea can be hotter when given on a cool light than it ever is at a desk. Someone softly begins a tune with no words. Not a lullaby in content, but it behaves like one, and the child lets there. Head learn the shape of a shoulder again. The shoulder remembers Dot in the shelter. The panel at the far left mentions sleep among prehistoric people. It lists no medicines, no clocks, no percentages, just gentle facts of dark and cold and fires, and the weight of blankets found in graves. A modern reader adds an internal note. The weight of our blankets masquerades as therapy, but has always been belonging. The whole has been keeping weight for ages. It is right to let it carry some of ours. No one says this aloud. Some sentences stand taller when left in the body. There is talk, low and unrushed, about what has changed. How light comes deeper into night now than the moon ever intended. How mornings are asked to arrive faster than the birds would recommend. How human hands have invented ovens that refuse to be charmed by a story about patience. There is an answering talk about what has not changed, the way bread increases in goodness when broken, the way kindness improves weather, the way a circle of people behaves like a recipe that can be cooked again next week and still taste right. Such discussions agree to end before anyone suggests policy. Not every thought has to become architecture dot in the last usable light. A ranger walks the boundary quietly. They nod to the group, to the stones, to the small animal that is deciding whether to call this place home for the evening. The ranger carries the calm that some jobs breed, a calm made of repetition and small adjustments and a long view that has learned the shape of years. They check a rope, press a post back into alignment, kneel to pick up a candy wrapper that has escaped the honesty of its owner. Then they stand by the rim, the way first people and later people and people with badges have done, and close their eyes for 2 breaths. Work does not need to watch them while they do it. Night tilts in. Stars introduce themselves with less ceremony than their fame suggests. The child, now asleep, is lifted with a kind of strength that delights in being asked. Someone says, "We should go," in the voice of a person who is promising not to. They stay 5 more minutes. 5 minutes is a unit invented by places like this. It contains more time than it admits. 5 minutes to watch the nearest farm's window become a small planet, and then a faint idea, and then a story told by darkness to itself. 5 minutes to thank the stones for behaving like furniture in a house that can never be purchased. 5 minutes to incline one's head. 5 minutes to let the old and the new shake hands beneath skin dot when they do leave. They promise each other to come back, though promises like that are often made and forgotten. This field has the habit of reminding gently. A week from now, a traffic light will hold one of them in a square of waiting long enough to think of the rim. A month from now, a vacation plan will lift a corner of paper and reveal a date not yet spoken for, and the field will step into it like a well-fitting shoe. Years from now, the child will draw their first circle without measure and say, "This is us. The whole is here." And a teacher will ask, "Why here?" And the child will shrug, as if to say that sometimes the answer has learned the dignity of being the answer without a defense. The last act belongs to the playing. After footsteps fade to the same depth as the wind, the ground inches its comforters into place. Leaf, shadow, cool, the scent of iron from a distant gate. A night animal patrols the perimeter and files a silent report, all as it should be. Somewhere, a jar in a kitchen has trouble deciding whether to be empty or to become a drum, and it is allowed to be both. It makes a sound that sounds like a thank you spoken into flagstone. In the houses, lights dim themselves without learning new tricks. Beds draw out their flatness like a welcome mat. Sleep comes across the threshold in the posture of a guest who has been here enough to know where the cups live dot inside a room with a window that dreams of the field. A modern sleeper learns an ancient thing again. That not knowing is not a gap, but a fabric. They turn in their sheet of night and discover there is more of the sheet than they allotted themselves. They are carried across hours with a steadiness learned from circles and stones and old wind. The whole does its work at a distance, balancing. Gravity, filing echoes until they shine, keeping a page in the book of the day marked, so the morning can find itself without panic. The sleeper's breath lines up with breath that nobody owns. The village of lungs will always be a better city than the cities of noise. Dawn leans into the edge of the world as generously as ever. The field wakes without ceremony. Birds unroll their plans, and after a short committee meeting in the shrub by the path, approve them. The sign by the hedge shines a little where dew has practiced reading it. The stones resume standing. The whole resumes keeping. And the present arrives again. Cup, camera, notebook, child who knows when a shoulder is theirs. That is the whole of it. A place that refuses to be solved, and is therefore infinitely helpful to anyone who must solve things all day long. The ages count themselves here, not forward, not backward, but together. If someone were to ask, with great politeness, for one more sentence before they go before, many other errands swallow the feet that brought them, this would be the sentence. A field would offer, if fields spoke as people speak, rest near questions that are older than your voice. They will hold you up while you practice being light. Then, if asked for a second sentence, the field would likely turn to the whole, and the whole would likely do what it has always done, remain. That is how the earth says lullaby. That is how the day, the century, the age closes its eyes without fear. That is how we discover that sleep, like time, is not an enemy to be fought, but a neighbor whose porch light is always on, and whose door has learned the miracle of opening inward. The time hole is never idle in this season of in-between. Each afternoon, two shadows cross at the rim, as if the ground were practicing writing with one hand and then the other. Children are taught to say which one is corn and which one is calendar. They always confuse them, and no adult corrects them because both answers are compliments. On windless days, the hole holds a bowl of quiet and waits for someone to set a thought inside it. The thought returns to its owner less prickly. On breezier days, it teaches the small flags of grass to bow without losing their place. There is a night near the end of the harvest weeks when the village makes a small parade. No banners, no speeches, only hands carrying small bright things. A lantern with a leaf pressed into its side, a ladle so clean it glows, a length of cord braided by three cousins, a loaf with a pattern on top that tells the oven a good story. The tiny doll, now wearing a wisp of blue. The procession passes. Around the rim, turns, passes again, and then stops. Every bright thing is shown to the whole. The whole keeps none of them, but it looks as if it had been improved by the seeing. Afterward, when the parade has melted into conversation, and people have returned to the business of standing near one another, someone begins the harvest prayer. That is not called a prayer because it contains no requests, only acknowledgments. It thanks small surfaces, the inside of a palm where a seed rested before being planted, the lip of a jar that chose never to chip, the corner of a step that remembered to remain friendly when feet were tired. It thanks larger things as if they were shy, the long path of the sun through a weather that often forgot its stubbornness, the thin silver thread of stream, the field's sense of humor when ruts tried to be novels. It thanks the whole for agreeing, to be uncertain and for making uncertainty a neighbor rather than a threat. Children fall asleep before the thanks are done. They are carried past the rim and feel the cool of it on their dreams. Some will remember that coolness tomorrow as a reason to ask for water, and they will be told yes, as if the yes had been scheduled years ago. Elders walk home at a pace that suggests they have put a little extra time into their pockets and are in no hurry to spend it. Somewhere a dog unrolls itself and decides the day was a good dog too. What remains after harvest is not just grain, not just stacks in stores. It is a shape in the mind, a circle of effort that began in hope, continued in patience, and concluded in gratitude. The time hole is the drawing of that shape on the ground, a reminder that work has a home, and rest has an address, and questions have a place to sit while answers take their time. Winter will come with its own stories and its own small arithmetic of daily bread. The field does not worry. It puts on the brown coat that suits it and practices standing still. Before sleep takes the village again, the last person at the rim does the last necessary job? Nothing. They stand and let the day's weight choose its path out through their heels. They let the stars look over their shoulder at the little doll and the little pile of pebbles and the big quiet circle. They Let the wind remember one more name and then mispronounce it lovingly. And then they go home in a straight line that behaves like a bow. The whole remains, unchanged and incredibly busy with the work of keeping the year in its gentle shape. Asterisk, asterisk. Evening arrives in a language that never went out of fashion. A pale gold laid carefully along the ridges. A hand on the shoulder of the plain. A pause that means the day knows when to stop. The stones around the old-time hole pick up their familiar duties as if they had only stepped away to sip water. Grass combs itself with a breeze and stands a little straighter. Modern footsteps, boots, and soft-soled shoes, a tripod's neat bite. The small, polite thunder of a distant road come as visitors, and the field takes them the way it takes weather, openly, without prejudice, measuring each change by weather. It can be borne gently. A car door shuts somewhere past the hedge, and a voice says something that belongs to maps and schedules. Then the voice lowers itself, because the hedge, like long grass before it, knows how to suggest a better volume. The first of the evening's guests appears on the path, a person who has read about this place for months, and finally gained the hour to come. They walk with the blend of reverence and ordinary human curiosity that suits any threshold. A second visitor follows, carrying a small notebook that already smells like graphite in the inside of a pocket. A third has brought a thermos to share, because someone once told them that sharing tea improves any landscape's opinion of you. The field approves. Approval feels like breathing more easily than the road made you breathe. A wooden sign asks for respect and receives it. There are ropes here and there, threaded like thoughtful lines reminding visitors where the earth has chosen to keep its skin unbroken. A notice board speaks in factual sentences about layers and dates and careful. Hands that cataloged careful things. It does not pretend to solve the whole. It lists what can be known and stops where the mystery begins. The way a good teacher stops on the step before a student's thought takes its own stride. The newest among the visitors smiles at this restraint, a smile that contains both gratitude and relief, as if some part of the mind is tired of being told and has been invited back to wondering. They step to the rim, not to conquer an angle for photographs, but to find the position where the ground's breath can be felt without leaning. Dangerously. The hole looks the way it always has when the light is right. Not menacing, not empty, but available like a chair by a window. One visitor takes the notebook out to catch a phrase that has arrived unannounced. Another unscrews the thermos and pours steam that joins the evening as if introduced to old friends. And the third holds a camera without raising it, because the picture at this moment is not for catching, but for being caught by Dot. There is a kind of modern silence that pretends to be emptiness. This is not that. This is the inherited hush that knows how to carry histories without dropping them, how to leave room for breath and for questions that will remain questions. Above, thin clouds drag their soft feet across a shelf of pale sky and acquire sunset as decoration rather than as mask. The oldest stone, no one can prove it is the oldest, but everyone agrees it looks the part leans at its necessary angle, just enough to tell the wind which way not to push. A roosting bird allows itself an editorial comment that sounds like yes, it might be soft bread set on a sill to cool out further. Along the path stands an interpretation shelter. A low roof, a bench polished by many patient maps of people's bodies. A panel that shows drawings of post holes and rims, and a cutaway of the ground like a cake. A panel mentions that water sometimes sits in the hole because water is fond of bowls. It notes that small bones and larger ones have been found nearby. It nods at a theory about seasons and another about burials. It points toward a timetable of dawns and shadows that would take a lifetime to memorize properly, which is what lifetimes are for. A child reads these lines aloud with the solemn mispronunciations that make fact warm. The present encampment of the curious spreads along the rim like a necklace laid out before deciding which shirt it should love. A couple from a town large, enough to forget stars, remembers them now. A student of soils kneels and presses two fingertips together, lightly staining a sentence in their memory with the color of silt. A historian lists nothing for once. The relief that lists may rest is large and kind. A person who spends their days in a glass building, touching nothing but keys, touches the rim with their flat, open hand and does not take the hand away for a while. Passwords change, touch remains. Someone suggests a small experiment that does not intrude. 10 breaths each, eyes half closed, the kind of counting that makes a night longer in the way that children wish for long nights at holidays. 1 breath, the tongue of cold metal somewhere far off. 2, the unnoticed throb of a small engine becomes a purr because night has softened it. 3, the rustle of a jacket becomes a river and is forgiven for being nylon. 4 and 5, the taste of tea likes the way it rests on the tongue longer than day permits. 6, all cell signals in a pocket sit down and wait their turn. 7, someone's heel finds a comfortable hollow and claims it as a temporary citizenship. 8, nobody remarks upon the way. The whole appears to breathe, because it would be impolite to call attention to a host's rib cage. 9, every stone in the circle remembers the absolute happiness of being merely stone. 10, a collective loosening that would look like prayer if anyone were watching, and nobody is. Late summer moves across the plain like a slow hand over tall grass, smoothing edges, turning the field the color of toast and honey. The stones around the time hole wear a lighter shade in this season, as if they too have been out in the heat and learned the soft discipline of ripening. Stalks bend with good manners. Seeds make themselves heavier without being proud. The village wakes earlier than usual, not with alarms or orders, but with the eager hush that arrives when a day already knows its purpose. Harvest waits, unhurried and absolute. Sickles are checked by feel, not by argument thumb along the curve. Eyes half closed, a small nod when the edge remembers what it was taught. Ropes are coiled and uncoiled until they agree to be kind to shoulders. Baskets practice sitting well. Children are given the important job of carrying water and laughter. Both are needed in the same quantity. Someone ties a ribbon around a wrist to remind the wrist not to hurry, and the ribbon remembers. Work begins where the field begins to lean, in the first swath that always whispers, "Here, here," like a friendly host at a crowded doorway. The first. Cut is a ceremony disguised as a chore. A sickle swings with a deliberate grace of handwriting, taught long before paper. Stems release as if bowing. Grain settles into arms that have practiced receiving. A small cheer travels not through mouths, but through posture backs straighten, breaths deepen, feet remember a comfortable distance from the next feet. This will take as long as it takes. Nobody minds. The cutting proceeds in lines that are never perfectly straight because hands prefer curves. One line finishes, another begins, each a tidy sentence in a language that measures abundance by quiet, piles rather than loud reports. When arms tire, they lower their requests to the ground, and the ground accepts, because that is the agreement here. Effort is a loan paid back in rest. Children move along the margins and gather what the wind tried to take as tips. They are told that stray seeds are shy and should be greeted first. They whisper hello to the stubble, and the stubble answers by letting go dot at mid-morning. The time hole lends its shade to water jars and to the basket that keeps slices of last night's bread from going lonely. The rim, cool as a polite hand, holds a row of cups while people step forward as their thirst remembers its manners. Someone sets a single grape on the edge because the edge has been a good neighbor all year. The whole does not change or claim. It simply keeps watch while hunger is folded and hunger becomes strength again. Threshing is a slow music. Ears are gathered on mats. Flails learn the same patience that sickles learned earlier. Chaff lifts and falls with a dignity that refuses to be insulted by the word chaff. When a breeze arrives, it is treated like an experienced guest invited to separate matters sensibly. The grain shows itself, small as small can be, and wise as winter. Every handful is a vote of confidence in the dark months. Every basket tipped into the larger basket says yes to someone's. February dot by noon. The field looks like a room after a celebration, decorated with the shapes of what has been done. Stacks stand at intervals as if they were elder cousins who came to make sure nobody forgets what generosity looks like. The last sections wait with a kind of cheerful stubbornness. The last of anything always does. People sit in clusters and eat the kind of meal that proves ordinary is a compliment, bread, soft cheese, cucumbers, who have learned to be polite, a slice of fruit with its own weather inside. The talk is small by design so that energy can be large later. A child, flushed and solemn, announces that one grasshopper let itself be moved to safety, and the news satisfies everyone. In the afternoon, rhythm takes charge. Hands swing, gather, bind, lay down. Feet mark out a pattern the body will remember when it is too old to harvest anything except stories. Laughter arrives at intervals and behaves. Someone invents a game of counting birds who approve the work. The score is kept on a stick, then lost, then refound, and forgotten with the good grace of all scores that never mattered. When a knock refuses kindness, a neighbor's thumb persuades it. When a back complains, a song pretends to be lighter, then air and lets the back rest underneath it. Near the time hole. A small pile becomes a small doll by accident, and then on purpose. Long stems are braided into a figure that knows how to stand without explaining itself. A ribbon finds its waist. A child lends it a name and then forgets the name immediately because the doll never asked to join anyone's family. It only asked to be allowed to keep watch for a while. It is set on the rim, and the rim holds it the way a windowsill holds a cup after the drink has been drunk, pleased to be useful again. Evening rehearses its entrance long before it steps in. Shadows lengthen like old dogs stretching. The stones lose their hot sarcasm and return to their usual generosity. The last row of standing grain looks taller than it is. Last things do that too. Different villages finish the finishing in different ways, but all prefer a small kindness to a dramatic flourish. Here, the last swath is invited to lie down with a promise. Some of your best will go back to the ground in the right month. We will not forget who made whom. A few stems are braided into a circle and passed hand to hand so that every poem will remember. Abundance even in sleep. When the tying and stacking are put to bed, the village faces the most necessary work, sharing. Grain is measured by the grammar of enough. Tallies are kept not only on sticks and cords, but also inside faces that have practiced fairness longer than they have practiced anything else. Widows receive the portion the husband's hands would have won. Children who do not yet cut receive the portion of their future cutting. A person who broke a tool and laughed at themselves receives an extra handful for being smart enough to laugh. The numbers work because nobody wants them not to. If someone disagrees, the disagreement is fed and watered and put to sleep gently. It wakes in the morning smaller and is thanked for cooperating God at the circle. Lamps are lit by people who have learned how to lift flame as if it were a fragile bird. The air gains the color of amber and quiet honey. Boughs are set along the stones, not as decorations but as announcements. We noticed the year, and the year noticed us. Baskets arrive like old friends who never knock. A pot settles on a three-stone fire with an air of authority it was born to. The first bites of a new loaf are offered, shared, and then shared again when someone remembers the person still washing. Hands at the well. Music begins as a rumor and decides to stay. Games at harvest do not require scoring or victory. They require the kind of attention that turns neighbors into mirrors. A circle of children tosses rings made of straw. A ring pauses on a wrist and is applauded as if it had spoken kindly to the wrist. A ring lands on the ground and is applauded for having learned how to land. Adults enact the old race. Who can carry a basket without letting a single grain escape? Every person wins. The ground collects any fugitives and promises to return them as something useful. In the corner, two elders exchange a story one phrase at a time. Nobody understands all of it. Everybody understands the parts that matter. The time hole keeps the center without asking for it. At some point, as it always does, someone will stand at the rim with a cup of water and pour a line around the edge, thin and bright as thread. The act is not explained. Nobody needs it explained. Water is returned to the place that kept the year's patience. The rim drinks with the discretion of a good host. A handful of seed is walked around the circle once and then lifted to the sky, and the sky shrugs in approval. Gratitude in this language is mostly spatial. You place what you love where it can be seen by what loves you. After the meal, someone passes a pouch of little pebbles, each smooth by being politely jostled with others in the river's pocket. Each person takes one and writes on it with a fingernail, a memory from the season, a blade that cut clean, a cloud that did its job at the right hour, a joke that made work weigh less. The pebbles are piled near the doll on the rim, and the pile looks like a small hill trying on the idea of being a mountain and finding it too ambitious. No one minds. The pile is perfect as a record of very small victories, the kind that feed a winter better than the grand kind. Night deepens. Crickets pace themselves again. The last pot is convinced to become tomorrow's breakfast. The field begins to glow with its own private moonlight, the sort that appears when a job that needed many hands has been completed by many hands, and the hands are still remembering the feeling of one another nearby. People disperse in twos and threes and ones. Nobody feels alone because the work is still present and will be present in the morning, not as burden but as proof that in the quieter days that follow, the harvest continues by becoming storage and repair. The granary, cool and serious, learns the exact voices of the families who visit it. It promises to tell the truth to each voice when asked. Roofs accept fresh thatch where the old had grown garrulous. Ropes are combed and coaxed back into attention. Tools are sharpened until they blush. A new ladder is born in the yard and tested by the smallest, because the smallest has the lightest step and the best questions. Every improvement is a thank. You that the hands do not know how to speak any other way. Dry time has its rituals too. Jars are filled at dawn from the surviving trickles upstream. The water is carried in careful pairs, not for balance alone, but for conversation. The path to the spring becomes a thin festival of slow steps, gossip, traded lightly like shade. At home, a pan of water is set where the door can see it, a promise to passing creatures that this house knows how to host. Children are sent with teaspoons to anoint the roots of plants that do not complain, but would enjoy a polite sip. No one asks the hole to make rain. It is not a magician, only a reliable witness. Yet many leave a cool stone on its lip, as if tithing. To patience. Between seasons, the river that raised the plain tries out experiments like any body learning itself. It changes a vowel in its pronunciation of a bend. It translates a small island one afternoon, and then pretends the island moved itself. It sends one branch to negotiate with reeds and another to court a sandbar. When the river decides to change its mind more dramatically, the field does not panic. It listens, lifts things out of the way in the order they will be needed again, and lets water learn the new lesson. Sometimes the new channel chooses to greet the time hole, running past like a messenger on good terms with everyone. Sometimes it keeps its distance, flattering the circle from afar with silver eyes. Animals receive the news as weather rather than as announcement. Deer adjust their roots as quietly as thick curtains falling in an empty room. Birds rewrite their commuting songs to include a stop at a shallower puddle. Foxes add a detour for the scent of damp clay, which carries gossip the way a scarf carries. Perfume. They are too polite to reveal anything and enjoy nonetheless. Frogs laugh evenly because frogs are administrators of change. They keep the calendar of ooze. Bees take note of revived flowers and write letters to their newer cousins in the language of dance. Letters that explain how sweetness can be woken with a teaspoon of patience and one good rain. Gardeners work on the understanding that water is a mind and a friend. They plant where wind decides not to argue, where slope understands generosity, where stones are willing to think like neighbors rather than like small, private planets. In wet months, they make braids of channels and persuade them to feed each. Bed in a long sentence with no scolding in it. In dry months, they cloth the ground with straw and shade, and that trick of breaking afternoon sun into kinder pieces. Children learn to say the names of water kindly. Trickle, cup, hush, soak, sip. They are taught not to run when carrying a full bowl, because running disrespects both bowl and road dot. There are years when water arrives as a story told too fast. The river proposes an arm around the field and almost forgets to let go. The hole fills to the brim and considers a career as a pond. Then people move together like a mind with many hands. Stones are stacked in temporary sentences. A ditch is opened as a side argument that politely diverts the loudest part of the discussion. Jars are lifted high. Baskets are moved to the roofs. Unneeded things are invited to go swimming first and report back. And when the river calms, the field thanks it without sarcasm. Silt is gathered like flour. Seeds are tucked into the new, layer as if into a blanket that the sky provided. There are also years when the sky keeps its water on the tongue and does not quite speak it, and plants change their posture and slow their voices. Smaller bowls are used and set down with ceremony. Stories at night grow longer and include the chapters about older dry times, which the grandparents deliver as both reassurance and instruction. Sleep does not complain. It simply uses lighter blankets and longer breaths. The whole, being honest, displays its ribs. Someone strokes the dry wall as one strokes a patient animal. A child, seeing the gesture, fetches a cup and pours it carefully along the edge. Nobody laughs. The cup is not enough to fill. It is enough to mean. Tools for water live where their hands can find them with eyes closed. A wooden scoop, a gourd, polished to a decent shine. A reed mat that can be rolled can become a channel, or unrolled can become a filter. A clay pipe one arm long for speaking to stubborn puddles. A thread of string tied around a jar to carry it as if it were a friend with shoulders. After a season of use, these tools are cleaned with more attention than they were given when new. Gratitude prefers objects that have done the job and learned the lazy corners. Thank you, scoop, someone says without noticing they said it. The scoop answers by becoming lighter in the hand. Children are allowed to play at the rim only when water has finished its big work and begun to preen. They float leaf boats and argue gently with gravity. They learn that a thin stick can move a surprising amount of world if the world agrees. They build a dam with a seriousness that would make a god nod approvingly, then open it ceremonially and salute the resulting trickle as if it were a guest of rank. In this school, failure is a resource. What breaks is looked at, named affectionately, and tried again. Water marks their toes, and the smell of it becomes a childhood that will never leave their hair. When the moon is out and the pool is calm, people bring chairs that do not mind mud and sit to watch. The water keeps two skies a fresh one on, top and an old one underneath. Voices are small. An elder tells how the whole has remembered winters by the number of frost lines and summers by the number of dragonflies. A traveler tells of a far river that runs backwards twice a day to match the pulse of a giant heart that lives beyond the horizon. Everyone approves such a heart. A child announces that the pool is a very large eye, and that eyes are the nicest. Sort of holes. No vote is taken. The statement is accepted for its handsome courage. Eventually, the knight chooses its softest jacket. Dew stitches silver onto the nearest grasses. The pool releases a little mist, not as spectacle, but as courtesy. So the field will have something to comb through its leaves. Owls discover themselves too heavy for wisecracks and go silent. The circle's stones rest in the posture of guardians who have nothing to guard except quiet. Even the whole forgets to be an absence and becomes a presence as strong as a hand, held without explaining why. The world returns from listening to the rain to listening to the continued shape of things. Sleep takes the cue and unwraps itself across the ground, a cloth that fits every surface. Morning again, and the ledger of water is added to without pen or page. A pitcher pours into a bowl and remembers falling from the sky. A skein of steam rises from porridge and remembers the pool like a place where it learned to be light. Wet footprints flower briefly on the doorstone and fade. Fading is one of the water's favorite conclusions. A new channel is tested with a fingertip and found worthy. Someone ties a piece of ribbon to a nearby stick to honor the engineering. The whole is darker today, or lighter, hard to say, which is another way of saying it is in conversation with the weather. Conversations last here. By the time afternoon leans its elbow on the hills, water has finished most of its errands. The pool is smaller or wider, the rim brighter or more thoughtful, the channels either practicing speed or practicing patience. The village takes its cue. Laundry is lifted and hung with clothespins that never scold. Floors are swept outward, and the heap is introduced to the garden. The children pass with wet faces and dry hands, always a sign of work well done. The dogs drink slowly and blink twice, as if to secure the blessing. Somewhere a jar croons quietly, because a cool corner has been offered it. What remains is the long lesson the field keeps teaching. That change is the native language of ground and sky, and water is its grammar. The time hole is a quiet page upon which that grammar writes in erasable ink. Flood is an uppercase letter that does not shout. Drought is a low vowel that asks for the mouth's kindness. Most days are sentences with ordinary words arranged. With gentle competence, the stones are punctuation. The frogs, if one must know, are commas. People, for their part, are the reader who enjoys rereading more than the surprise of a plot twist. Toward evening, someone carries a small bowl to the rim and tips it. Not much. Enough to say, I saw. Enough to say, I learned. Enough to say, I will not forget how to pour and how to be poured. The water joins what is already there and does not ask for thanks. The person sets the empty bowl upside down on the grass so the night will have a place to sit if it needs one. Lamps are lit in ways that do not pretend to be moons. One by one, doors borrow shadows and close to the width of kindness. The whole, which has kept the day's reflections without dropping any, keeps the night's in sleep, taking its cue from all this careful motion. Comes as water does when it is well behaved slowly everywhere, without argument filling the smallest hollows of worry first, polishing the edges of thought, finding its level between ribs and under eyelids, staying exactly as long as necessary, and leaving everything cleaner than it found it. People rise like seeds that know when to. The first motions are heavier than they need to be, only so the last motions of the day may be lighter than they were asked to be. Someone feels new skill in their fingers and recognizes the dream where a master showed them how to turn chord without twisting thought. Someone else remembers an apology and discovers it has already been delivered while they were asleep. All that's left is the handshake. A child wakes with a purchase order from the undersoil. 3 pebbles, 1 feather, 2 stems of grass. They collect them, and the dream nods. That is how treaties are maintained here, with small objects arranged as proof that the night and the night, the day are still acquaintances. The whole keeps a little of every dream, not as theft but as record. The way bread keeps a little of the hand that needed it, even after the hand is busy with soup. It does not give the dreams back in bulk. It gives them back as steadier feet, kinder voices, keener patience. This is the currency of a place that has committed itself to the idea that mystery is for resting beside rather than for conquering. By the time the sun stretches its arm across the stones, people are already using their change. Breakfast is deliberate and cheerful. Someone laughs softly at no one's expense and places an extra strip of fruit on a cousin's plate. Tools report for duty in a better mood than yesterday. A plan taken from the shelf of sleep is set on the table and looked at from 3 sides. It still looks right. It can begin. The watchers of the calendar arrive with their pebbles and sticks and find the markers where they were expected. The sky congratulates their attention by cooperating. In 20 different small ways, the world beneath has become the world above, and the whole has directed the orchestra without saying a word. Before work spreads out, someone walks to the rim and leans in as if telling a secret to a wise animal. The words are simple. Thank you for the sleep that did not make a show of itself. The opening holds the thanks the way a cup holds water, without agenda or applause. A child brings a crumb of bread and a single blueberry and sets them to this side. The child believes that even places get hungry sometimes. The crumb is gone by noon because birds are brilliant, and the blueberry's color sinks into the soil like a dot of sky that decided to stay. The day goes forward as days do here. Work first, then rest, then more work, then the practice of noticing pleasure. Tonight the village will sleep again, and the whole will keep watch again, and the world beneath will offer its repair shop again. The great sleep is not a single event. It is the long friendship between surface and depth, breath and echo, blanket and stone. Not one person can explain the time hole. Not one person needs to. It is enough that dreams arrive safely and leave their work behind without breaking a cup. It is enough that morning finds hands ready and voices soft. It is enough that the earth accepted the village's wait for another night and returns it without complaint, balanced as a bowl on a steady palm. Asterisk, asterisk, the first drop comes the way good news does, without fanfare, one soft touch on the back of the hand, a darker speck on the dust, a small circle drawing itself and then deciding to rest. The field holds still, listening. The stones around the time hole seem to lean a finger's width, as if tilting an ear. Somewhere to the west, a curtain of rain is already walking the hills. The smell arrives before anything wet can be seen. Earth remembering an older version of itself, seed remembering a sentence that ends with harvest, air remembering it can be a drink as well as a breath. Rain in this place is not a stranger. It has the manners of a seasonal guest who knows where the cups are kept and does not need to be shown the way to the basin. It begins politely like taps on leaf and thatch, a faint drum on the lids of jars, the smallest possible applause. Upon the circle's stones, the ground accepts the first sips with a gratitude as steady as the color of bread. Dust ties itself into little knots of darker dust, then unties again into patient mud. Footprints that meant something a moment ago decide to keep their meanings private. The rim of the hole takes on a soft sheen as if the dark inside were learning. To speak a brighter grammar, when the rain thickens, everything in the field tries out a deeper voice. Thatch lowers its pitch and becomes a warm percussion. The clay shoulders of the old pots hum at their rims and call each other by names they have used for 100 storms. Gutters stitched from bark and thread practice being thin rivers and succeed. Around the circle, little channels that were only ideas last week now come boldly out of the ground, drawing lines that say this way, with the confidence of a finger on a map. People step into the doorway and watch not to supervise, but to witness. The rain does not need help. It needs company. Soon, the time hole is ringed with moving water. It does not flood in a hurry. It fills the way a room fills when friends arrive, one at a time, and discover that silence is a fine host. The first trickles join at the low point and negotiate with silt. Ripples go down the slope as if reading it with their fingertips. A narrow sheet of clear falls from the dent the children call the spoon. Then the whole rim becomes a necklace of droplet beads sliding toward each other, joining, letting go, joining again, the way good plans do when no one insists on owning them. A small sound begins a round syllable, a careful vowel, and it repeats without becoming boring. A lesson in how to continue. By twilight, the hole has become a pool. Its surface is not a mirror so much as a memory, keeping the shapes above it slightly kinder than they are in daylight. Rain stipples the pool's face, and the stipples erase themselves immediately, as if the water is proud of the trick and happy to perform it 1,000 times. A louder breath comes from the west, and the pool shivers, showing for a heartbeat the stones at its shallow edge, then covering them like a considerate blanket. Frogs, whose patience is matched only by their sense of humor, assemble at the rim and discuss whether the new pond is a cousin, an uncle, or a talented visitor. Their voices, all agreement and no committee, make the darkness feel numbered in a friendly way. At night, the rain slows and softens, and then decides to sleep where it falls. The pool remains. Stars come to see themselves and are surprised to be able to take a bath in their own light. A moth, tempted by the lantern in the nearest house, changes its mind and comes to the water instead. It sits on the bank and cleans its tiny hands as if preparing to greet someone important. Grass that bent for months toward the hole now leans farther, pleased to have its attention rewarded. Somewhere beneath, roots loosen their shoulders and taste a little more widely. The earth takes a long, easy drink. Morning finds the pool settled into its work, holding, reflecting, inviting, keeping cool. Children come with cups and dip respectfully, tasting water that remembers cloud and bird and dark. Someone drapes a cloth in the shallows to clean it and whispers admiring remarks about how the edge knows to be gentle. A woman rinses herbs and hears stories in the drip that follows each stalk. This one remembers the ridge. This one, the mossy place beside the old log. This one, the corner where the shadow sits in summer like a sleepy cat. Not every story needs to be told. It is enough that the ears of the village can feel them. The pool does not stay a pool forever. It is part of a larger choreography with many dignified bows. The sun arrives with tact and begins the work of lifting, cup by cup, the water that volunteered to lie down. A hush grows back into the air. The rim glows where it was washed. A thin fringe of tiny silver left by the retreating edge looks like a lace that the day forgot to put away. By afternoon, the hole is darker again, deeper looking, because it is emptier, like a basket that gained weight by being used. Asterisk, asterisk, if rain lingers for days, the story changes its tempo. Channels cut themselves sharper, learning to pronounce their own names with more clarity. Silt chooses new homes and leaves behind polite farewell notes in the form of lines and fans. The hole keeps its depth, but grows an apron, a small beach, like the beginning of an idea for a lake that knows better than to grow up fast. Fish rarely visit. This is not their country, but water beetles write messages on the surface with such professional strokes that even the stones look encouraged. In that season, the field moves slower. Work pauses between showers and resumes with a kind of vigor that doesn't break a sweat. Bread tastes stronger. Sleep arrives earlier because listening takes energy to dot when the rains rest for a quarter of a year and the world remembers its thirstier voice. The whole becomes a history book. Its walls show the tidy stripes of seasons pale or fine sand lound, darker where the water pushed harder and left behind a gift. Pebbles were a riverlet, brought guests who knew how to wait. People kneel and read with their hands, choosing a sentence here and there, not to judge the year, but to praise it. In dry weather, the whole also changes diction. It speaks dust and seed and the busy script of ants. It speaks of lizards learning, careful etiquette for ownership of warm stone. If the earth cracks at the rim, the cracks are like smiles on tired faces, kind and honest, not at all frightening. Sleep comes differently to each, as weather comes differently to fields. More quickly where ground is already soft, more slowly where the day has had to be firm. The ones whose work was in their hands sink first. The grinder of meal, the weaver. Of belts, the person who counted beads, because counting also counts the counter and weighs them more kindly. Those whose work was in their thinking drift after, wearing the thoughtful expressions of people who have managed to put their thoughts on a chair by the door with a promise to pick them up later. A watcher by the fire stays sitting and lets his uprightness turn into a sort of dream that has learned to hold its head. The whole, which has been a companion all day, becomes a companion of a different sort. While people sleep, it keeps inventory in a language that has never needed a word for hurry. It notes the weight of each breath, which it reckons not as burden, but as gift. It multiplies the number of sleeping shoulders by the number of blankets that keep them, and sets the answer in the ledger under warmth. It listens to the way the roof speaks to the night, and writes favorable notes beside every gentle creak. If the wind rises beyond what the door has agreed to tolerate, the whole throws its voice just enough to sound like a much nicer wind. Weather listens to compliments. It takes the hint dreams approach from the shallow end first. A person finds a familiar path with fewer stones than it contained in daylight. They walked and discovered that the path is pleased to be walked. Another notices a jar that has learned to refill itself by means of patience. The jar says nothing about its technique, and the dreamer admires the discretion. Someone else, usually a child, but not always, goes to the rim of the hole and peers into a darkness that behaves like a mirror. In it, they see themselves doing tomorrow's tasks as if they had already done them once, and the relief of familiarity pours through their sleep like warm water agreeing with a cold bowl. Deeper dreams arrive after the last ember decides to taste its own ash. There is the dream of the ladder that does not need rungs, because rising is achieved by remembering lighter things. The dreamer finds that each memory of a kindness becomes a step. There is the dream of the path beneath the path, where roots offer their clean, flexible algebra, and the earth shows how it carries weight by distributing it among many willing friends. There is the dream of the great animal that the plain becomes at night, breathing slowly, turning once, settling its hooves under itself, and sighing. In that dream, the whole is the animal's listening ear. Dreams gather there and are heard. World beneath is not a matter of punishment or peril here. It is a set of neighboring rooms that can be visited without shoes. Seeds keep their tiny conversations about trust and timing. Roots keep their treaties about sharing. Stones keep their doctrine of no panic. Sometimes a sleeper goes under and is guided by a small light that does not show up in daylight. Perhaps it is carried by a cricket, perhaps by a patient beetle. Perhaps the light is the dreamer's own breath deciding to be decorative. They find cellars of coolness and jars of sound in a library where each shelf is labeled with a season instead of a number. They borrow nothing. They sit and read with their hands, then put everything back. Some dreams are old family property and are taken out like quilts when the weather calls for them. The dream of the kitchen that tidies itself, which some say comes from the time when every child believed bowls were people and needed to rest. The dream of the lost glove, which has learned every hiding place and uses them for teaching, rather than teasing. The dream of the field that harvests the moon into loaves. The dream of the hole as a hearth, where time warms itself before going out into the morning to work. People wake from such dreams with the exact calm that a good tool feels. When it knows it will be used well. There are dreams that do the work of repair. A quarrel that could not find its ending in daylight finds it by traveling a loop that passes under the rim and returns with new patience stitched into it like a quiet scene. A grief that would not sit is persuaded to take a chair where the night keeps extra chairs. A tiredness that had become proud of itself is reminded how to bow and lie down. In these dreams, the hole is not a well to fall into. It is a steady table where the work can be spread out and reconsidered while the mind takes a walk around the house to cool down. Children sometimes dream on behalf of the village. They visit the stream and see where it will change its mind next. Spring. They report the news by waking late and asking for water in a voice that curves like the new bend. They go to the storehouses and notice which beam would be happier with a sister beside it. They deliver the message by insisting that their sleeping mat needs to be a hand's width farther from the wall. They meet a stranger in the dream and bring back the feeling that will let the stranger be invited properly when they arrive for real. No one interrogates the child. The child is thanked, and the village rearranges itself by the width of a kindness. On certain nights, the whole plain dreams together, and the whole is the conductor of an orchestra and prefers whispering to playing. Animals nestle into there. Virgin's foxes dream of soft ground that chooses to remember every print. Owls dream of air that behaves like a familiar stare. Mice dream of a pantry that tells jokes about abundance. Plants keep slower, longer dreams, but some of their laughter is audible in the leaves. The sky takes a nap on the hills and snores a little. The sound is not big enough to forget, only big enough to be a story later. Stones do not dream, they say. Stones recall. Yet even the stones seem pleased to be recalled. When illnesses visit a house, sleep adjusts itself as a midwife adjusts. Pillows. The air cools without becoming cold. The lamp agrees to be a smaller sun. Footsteps learn the choreography of caring. The person who needs the most rest dreams at the shallow edge, where waking can be reached with one hand. Their dreams are inventories of courage, presented as baskets of apples counted, polished by a sleeve, passed around. The whole adds its soft echo, so each apple sounds like more than one. A fevered night becomes a lesson in modest heroics. In the morning, the heroism is invisible, and the modesty remains, which is the style admired around here. Guardians of sleep take their turns at the edge of camps and houses. Their job is not to stare into the dark as if it were a riddle, but to watch the sleep itself, to see if any blanket confuses itself with the snake and needs straightening. If any ember politely asks for separation before it becomes a problem. If any dreamer is trying to remember how to rest and needs a song to serve as a bridge, the whole is their assistant. It throws back their quiet cough at half volume so as not to startle anyone. It informs the wind that there are people here who are proud of their resting. It holds the last whispered joke told by the one who will be first awake and returns it at dawn so the joke can be finished. Some dreams are journeys that begin because someone cannot go anywhere during the day. Old knees walk the coast and keep it company, counting waves in a language the knees remember from earlier sand. A busy parent climbs a long hill that contains no children, only friendly stones, and sits at the top with a complicated gratitude that belongs to both silence and company. A shepherd who has seen more sky than any person deserves dreams of a room that has never heard of weather. The whole helps them travel by reminding the road to behave itself. There are, too, the dreams that do not belong to people alone. The village dreams of its own best shape, and in the morning, someone moves a bench the same width the dream suggested. The field dreams of a day when the hands will be free enough to take the long way home. By afternoon, a child announces a detour and everyone is pleased to agree. The door dreams of opening with less sound, and a pot of oil suddenly looks like an idea rather than an ingredient. The whole dreams of nothing. That is its job. It keeps the space where other dreams may stand up without hurting themselves on. Furniture. When night is at its roundest, the world beneath does its theater for anyone whose sleep walks with its eyes open. Worms write poems that no one reads, but everyone understands as better soil. Water practices being patient by keeping company with rock. Roots conduct a slow parliament about holding and releasing. They vote for balance and pass the motion with a rustle so dignified it makes even silence wonder if it could be improved. Bones animal and human dwell without haste. They attend nothing and approve everything. Beneath the whole, a long hallway of friendliness extends, and at the far end hangs a mild light that neither promises nor refuses. It continues. Eventually, as always, the sky remembers a color it wishes to show. It does this from the east because that is where the plane prefers to be surprised. First, there is a paler black that admits how much it enjoys being gray. then a gray that decides to share, then a thin blue practiced by swallows, then the kind of gold that refuses drama, not banners and trumpets, only a small, gentlemanly bow. Sleep, courteous as a guest who reads the room, begins to excuse itself. It puts away the chairs it borrowed from bones, straightens the rug laid by roots, thanks the hole for the acoustics, and departs by the door with the least creak. Those who are new to the field often ask how so many small things can survive. The answer is the same one the whole gives to almost every question: by being quiet. Clay remembers the pressure of a thumb for a long time when no one presses it to. Perform. Stone tools keep their edges sharper when they are allowed to nap. Bone beads prefer darkness to shouting. The ground makes galleries of these preferences, narrow and unlit and excellent for storage. Rain will sometimes write a temporary label on the surface charcoaled lines, a change in texture, a color that wanders sideways instead of down. Then the label fades because the show is over and need not be repeated. At the northern edge of the circle, there is a place where many small bones lie together, as if they had decided to put on music again. People call it the quiet choir. The bones are drilled or grooved. Their voices must have been delicate when they were strung. No one has restrung them, even for a moment, because reanimation is not the point. The point is a gratitude that does not demand demonstration. Still, it is easy to imagine a line of children passing under the choir on their way to bed, each one lifted briefly to be exactly the height of the music that used to move there, each one feeling the soft, weightless idea of sound touch the top of the head like a good instruction. South of the rim, the keepings look more like tools. There is a line in the soil where grinding happened for years. Grains turned to meal on a slab rubbed smoother than politeness by use. Nearby are the broken but still smiling faces of pots whose shoulders remember heat. A row of chipped stones suggests a workshop where someone taught others the angle at which a flake becomes a blade and not a sulk. It is easy to picture two people sitting cross-legged as evening took the edge off day, one watching the other, both surrounded by careful waste. So much of making is practice. The field remembers practices that turned into skill because patience had somewhere to sit. If you ask gently, someone will lead you to the place where rests were kept for travelers. Small belts of leather, braids of plant fiber, a pair of shoes that learned every tiny slope of the path between the last water and the nearest sleep. None of these are taken or worn. The field does not lend without the possibility of return, and these have already returned to memory, to praise, to the respectful smile that people wear when they recognize the shape of tired hands doing something. Kind for the unknown. A stone here is polished on both sides from a habit of sitting, another shaped by hundreds of backs leaning for a moment before moving on. Rest is a keeping as necessary as bread. The whole seems to nod when travelers stop, as if punching a small invisible ticket that says, "You belong to the long story too." Once, after a winter that taught everyone humility, the field revealed something larger, the suggestion of a doorway laid flat, the outline of timbers long since turned to a different form of wood, the faint signature of a room that respected the round language of the whole, rather than imposing a square upon it. People stepped softly around it for days, dusting and tracing, and allowing their faces to learn a new expression of care. Inside the doorway lay a little row of spoon, a string of nuts, a doll made from grass tied at waist and wrist. No one could say whether the room had been a shelter for the living or a nest for the dead. No one tried to decide. It was enough to see the arrangement and hear the lesson it offered without raising its voice, that small kindnesses last as well as any monument, that a child's object can be the most durable kind of architecture. In all of this, there is grief, though it has practiced being gentle. The burials around the rim are evidence of partings. The keepings are evidence of goodbyes, spoken in objects rather than in speeches. There is a weight that comes with noticing so much. The field knows how to help with that as well. After a longer day of careful seeing, people lie on their backs, just beyond the stones, and let the sky lift the weight, the way a friend lifts a basket by taking one handle and smiling. Cloud, star, bird, blew the oldest solvents. The whole keeps watch, and not one sorrow goes unattended. Some nights the wind sings at the lip, not a song about grief, but a song that can accommodate it without tearing. When the time comes to, leave hands brush dust from knees, bowls are covered, and tools are wrapped in cloth that smells faintly of smoke and clean water. A few grains are scattered at the rim, not as payment, not as a bargain, but as a habit as old as the first granary. Someone says thank you out loud. The word lands differently when it is spoken to ground. It becomes heavier and more noticeable, and then sinks in like warm tea. The field does not answer in words. It favors returns. The next day's walk will offer another bead, another small circle of stone, another thread from a garment that was woven with the same care the next garment will receive. The keepings do not call out for ownership. They prefer stewardship, which is quieter and lasts longer. Children are taught the difference by being allowed to find and told to follow the rule of the soft hand. Touch without taking, replace without improvement, add only what would make the place feel more completely itself. Often that means adding nothing at all. Sometimes it means a wildflower head laid down for color, or a strip of reed twisted into a ring and left for the morning to consider. The field seems to appreciate the restraint. Appreciation from the ground feels like walking easier on your way home than you did on your way there. People who sleep nearby say their dreams improve when they have spent time among the keepings. Objects that lasted learn how to last through sleep and teach that skill to the mind. how to hold form without gripping, how to be useful without being proud, how to carry the warmth of a hand long after the hand has gone to do something else. There is a dream in which the bead rolls toward the shard, and the shard leans against the blade, and the blade lies flat so the others can rest. And someone watching whispers, "Yes, this is how a community becomes permanent." Another dream shows a bowl filled with the exact amount of light needed to see where you are going, and no more. The whole lends the bowl, then takes it back politely at dawn dot, and so the day ends with small recognitions gathered into a larger one. That the time hole is not only a mystery to be visited with questions, but a room where the past sets down what it is finished using, so the present can remember how to use itself more kindly. The relics do not ask to be solved. They ask to be seen in the slow light and put back with a thank you. They ask for the kind of sleep that does not forget in the morning, but wakes with a hand already half open. In that way, a circle of care widens without creaking. The field rests. The whole rests. Those who have kept and those who have been kept rest. Night gathers all of it together, ties the old ribbon in a soft knot, and leaves the bow where anyone can untie it with a breath. Asterisk, asterisk, evening gathers itself neatly over the plain, folding light along the edges as a good blanket is folded along. Bed, the stones around the time hole cool with a soft logic, giving back to the air the day they held for safekeeping. People finish the small housekeeping of dusk coals, arranged to glow rather than flare, bowls rinsed, tools put to bed in. They're quiet bundles, and the village's breath begins to rise and fall together. This is when sleep unties its moorings and begins to drift through the circle, like a boat that already knows where the shore will be, even if the water has not yet made up its mind. The night's first visitors are the sounds that agree to lower themselves. A cricket settling into its single syllable. A bird trying out two notes, then deciding the first was enough. The far gate making its friendly complaint before deciding to behave. The whole hears each and returns a version so gentle it could be mistaken for forgetfulness. That is the trick of the place, to take a thing and hand it back smoothed, quieter, with its sharp corners taught to be patient. People seep toward sleep under that instruction, not because they are ordered to, but because they are welcomed. Beds here are not so much furniture as arrangements of trust. A mat is laid where the floor has learned how to be level. A roll of woven stuff becomes a shoulder's idea of company. A child's blanket is held in place by a small polished stone that has been doing the same job for 3 older siblings and will do it for the next cousin when the cousin arrives. The air smells of grain, of old smoke that never learned to be rude, of a sprig of mint that likes to be near noses while those noses dream. Doors are left the width of a hand's comfort, not to keep anything out, but to let the night wander in and see how people are getting on. Lullabies are more guidance than performance. A mother hums the geography of the day, the path around. The garden, the step up to the storehouse, the curve of the rim, and the baby answers with a breath that makes the humming seem like an echo of a smaller bell. An elder sings a tune with only one word in it, a word so old it forgot what language it belongs to. The word pretends to be a vowel, and the melody pretends to be a long exhale, which is all any song hopes for. A father touches forehead, cheek, chin, shoulder in an order the child will later use to find home in unfamiliar rooms. The lamp nods in agreement and then looks away to keep from boasting. The most beautiful myth is the least dramatic. The whole is a neighbor. It minds its home, keeps its boundaries, does not gossip, holds what is entrusted, warns by example that depth is not a performance but a job. People bring small things too. A good neighbor a pear, a piece of cloth, a song practiced to the level of kindness, and the neighbor keeps them until keeping is finished. When a child loses a trinket, someone will suggest the whole is holding it for safety. When a traveler loses a way, someone will suggest standing at the rim until the echo returns a hint. This is not superstition. It is a habit of soft hope. On the warmest nights, myth and lullaby marry and become the same comfort. The song says the whole is a cradle, a boat, a shady place, a cool hand laid on a fevered brow. The words are small, with a long hum between, them to leave room for drifting. Hush now, the singer says, let the old earth teach the young sleep. A baby will sigh and settle and make the very sound the rim sometimes makes when rain finds it after many dry weeks. People smile and forget they are smiling. Other communities who share the playing add to the basket and take from it. To the east, they say the hole was cut by a wheel of time that rolled out of the sky when time was new and not yet sure of itself. To the north, they say the hole is a moon nest, and when the moon goes missing, it is only sitting in the nest giggling with the stars. To the west, they believe the hole holds a door that will open when the world is ready to take better care of itself. To the south, they call it a keeper of leftovers, light left after sunsets, warmth left after hearths, kindness left after hard days, so the next morning has something ready to begin with. None of these contradict each other. They sit in the basket like fruits that ripen at different hours. Every myth has a last line that fits neatly in a breath. Some are benedictions. Some are instructions disguised as weather reports. Some are just the word yes, handed around until it becomes many and then set down to cool. The whole keeps the last lines the way a good cook keeps a salt jar handy close enough to improve everything, far enough not to empty by accident. When the fire goes thin, the stories fold themselves carefully, and the basket is covered with a cloth that remembers many hands. A few embers slip into the hole like words dreamed before they are spoken. The group rises slowly, as if standing were a continuation of listening. Someone smooths the ground with the palm of a hand in the old gesture of gratitude. Someone else lifts the sleeping child and discovers that sleep has decided to become heavier than worry. If you walk away and look back, the circle appears to be emptier than it is. A glow lies along the rim, the way a memory lays along a road, not visible to haste. The whole by itself is not more mysterious than a well, a hearth, the shadow under a fruit tree. It is the companionship that deepens it the way people agree to sit together and succeed at not solving, the way stories know to end before they break the spell they cast. Before dawn, the last keeper of the coals revisits the rim and offers the simplest myth of all, the one that needs no basket. He leans in and says, "Thank you for taking our voices and returning them to us softer." Then he waits to see if the echo will tease him or bless him. It does neither. It simply acts. Like an echo, which in this place is the loudest kind of kindness. The keeper smiles into the dark and turns homeward, carrying a quiet so complete it seems to have weight. The first birds divide the horizon into songs. The grass unbuttons its dew, and the stones begin their day of standing. The myths do not end. They flow inward as dreams and outward as patience. The whole keeps them with the same competence it keeps everything, promises, echoes, small failures, larger mercies. Not one person has explained it, and nobody is poorer for that. The world is gentler when something inexplicable is allowed to remain so. Sleep understands this, and so does morning. Between them stretches the rim, a soft circle around a deeper soft, where voices go to practice being part of all other voices. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. By late afternoon, the light turns the soil to honey, and the field around the strange time hole loosens its hold on detail. Even the stones seem to exhale. This is the hour when small things are easiest to notice, when the ground gives back what it has kept in the softest possible way. A person walking the rim with unhurried steps begins to see them. A bead in the posture of a seed, a flake of worked, stone shining like a shy idea, a pottery shard whose curve remembers the hand that set it on a fire long ago. The whole is not only a question. It is also a shelf where the past has set down its belongings and trusted the air to be kind. People who live nearby do not call these objects treasure. They call them keepings. The word suits the place. A keeping might be a fragment of clay that still wears the fingerprint of the potter who pinched a rim into patience. It might be a chip of flint that carries the last bright whisper of a blade being born. It might be a seed bead carved from bone, a small hoop of copper turned gentle by years of earth, a lump of red pigment that can still persuade fingers to smile. None of these are loud. None insist. They prefer to be found by someone who has learned how to look slowly, under a sky that likes to take its time. Sometimes the keepings gather in company, as if a careful hand had arranged them without, wishing to be recognized. Near the ring of stones, there may be a shallow bowl of pebbles, each the size of a thumbnail, each chosen for smoothness or a color that lingers even after a day of rain. A little farther on, someone kneeling will notice the tidy seam of charcoal. That marks the edge of an old fire, and under it a circle of bones so light they seem to be made of thought. If you sit quietly and breathe with the ground, patterns begin to show themselves without asking for praise. Here is where a mat once lay. Here is where water dripped from a jar. Here is where a hand reached into a pouch and took out a blessing and left a small equivalent behind. On certain evenings when the wind is nothing but a polite rumor, the field suggests a different kind of keeping. These are the belongings given to those who have gone to sleep and were expected not to wake in the usual way. The time hole does not brag about burials, but it does not hide them. The signs are modest and oval of darker soil, a depression that knows how to keep secrets, a ring of small stones drawn up like chairs around a friend. If the ground feels safe, a person may lift one thin layer of earth and find a bead, a tooth, a button of shell, not to take, only to greet. The field has a habit of returning such greetings with a hush that makes the heart feel carefully folded dot in the oldest part of the rim. People say bodies were set down in flexed positions, knees drawn as if the earth were a cradle. Over them were laid things that would be useful in whatever waited. A knife that had been taught to be kind, a bowl whose lip knew how to meet a mouth with hospitality, a bundle of dried herbs that remembered summer's conversation with bees. Some graves contain a spatter of red stain, as if someone had brushed color over the sleeper to say, "Here is warmth, here is life. Take some with you." In other places, the sleeper is embraced by a ring of stones, not heavy, just loyal and a flat. Slab rests above like a hand placed lightly on her brow. The whole seems to keep its breath when such resting places are near, the way a house goes still when someone has just fallen asleep. No one points or whispers when they pass by. Walking near. A burial is mostly a matter of learning how to carry your weight so the earth does not think you are hurrying. You allow your steps to practice courtesy. You touch your chest lightly, as if to make sure your own doorknob turns smoothly, and then you go on. The field notices this and approves. Approval from the ground is not loud. It feels like finding an easier rhythm for your breath. Sometimes the keepings are not buried, but set down in sight. A small arrangement near the rim or a little way inside the circle. A stack of 3 stones shaped like a story's beginning, middle, and end. A carved stick whose patterns read like a path under a finger. A feather pinned to the soil by a seed pod. These are not memorials so much as conversations. Someone has sighed, "I was here," and the earth has answered, "I know." People who notice such layouts rarely change them, but they may add a seed or a pinch of brain, just enough to say, The thread continues. Asterisk, asterisk, on evenings of clear weather, a quiet work might occur at the edge of the hole. There is usually a cloth, a basket, a shallow bowl, a brush made of grass, and the same patient hands that appear in every task a community does more than once. The work is not to collect, but to acknowledge. A bead is dusted, a shard is wiped, a flake of flint is turned until the last light of day finds the angle of its birth. If something has been lying awkwardly, it is persuaded into a more comfortable posture. If something has rolled away from its companions, it is reminded of where company is resting. When a tiny thing tries to cling to the brush, the person smiles and returns it gently to the place that taught it to be still. From the outside, it may look like cleaning. From the inside, it feels like listening with the hands. Asterisk. Some guests inscribe a small notch on a travel staff when a certain star sits squarely in a doorway. Others leave a bead by the stone that accepts the first winter sun. Still others take nothing but a breath deep enough to last until the next. For giving milestone dot every year, there is a day when the watchers do nothing but sit. No sticks are set, no pebbles moved, no lines compared. The sky is allowed to be large and irresponsible, and the calendar is closed like a book laid face down to save a page. On that day, the whole looks younger, as if relieved to be a place. Again, rather than a patient instrument, the people nap in the circle's shade and wait to find that more of the year has passed obediently, while they were asleep than while they were busy. The lesson is always the same and always welcome. The world keeps decent time without the help of anxious hands dot, as night returns and stars reach for the rim. The oldest watcher, who has no need of titles, walks the edge silently with a sprig of sage. The leaves brush the stones and the ground between them in the same way a mother brushes the hair away from a sleepy forehead. Then the sprig is set upright on the rim, a small standard for nothing in particular, and left to lean where the wind asks it to lean. The watchers bow not deeply, just enough to remember their necks are flexible, and begin dot, 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 asterisk, 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 asterisk. At night, the time hole is an ear, and everything that breathes in the plain seems to lean toward it and speak a little softer. Wind lowers its voice to a hush of rushes. Crickets pace their syllables until they are the size of eyelids. Even the fireside stories lose their bright edges and round themselves like stones rolled by water. No one can explain the whole, not with the day's tools, not with the day's plans, but in the hours when bread is finished and bowls are clean and coals choose to glow rather than burn. Myth arrives with careful feet and sits down at the rim. The old people say that is how the whole has always been fed, not with certainty, but with listening. A first story the children learn is a small one, simple enough to fit in a pocket. Long ago, before the grass had taught itself to be green, the plain was a pale lake. The lake was patient, and patience, like water, always finds the lowest place. The lake gathered itself to leave, and where it took the last of its weight, the earth sighed and made a hollow to remember. That hollow is the hole. The story says a memory shaped like a cup. When the wind pours in, the storyteller whispers, it is only the lake returning to check its reflection. This makes children smile in a way they can be mistaken for sleep. Later they hear the longer version, the one with weather for hands and seasons for voices. In that telling, the whole is a meeting house for time. Winter arrives early and sits on the cold side. Spring brings flowers, but not too many. Summer laughs at both and unslings its basket of light. And autumn, diligent as always, sweeps the floor. They say the year argues, but only the way friends argue to polish a shared memory. By dawn the four agree to pass gently over the fields, to move in the old order, to leave enough for the next year to inherit. The whole keeps their promises, because promises, like leaves, gather where the ground yields a little. Sometimes the night favors a braver story, though even bravery is quiet here. It begins with the hunter who loses the path in fog and steps too close to the rim. He calls, and the whole returns his name, but not in the same voice. It returns the name the way grandparents say a name full of breath, full of years. He hears how the name was used when he was an infant, how it will be used when his hair is frost, how it will be carried when his basket is empty and someone else takes it up. The hunter kneels and thanks the echo for enlarging him. It is not a warning tale. It is an instruction on how to belong to one's own name. Elders keep a basket of myths beside the fire. It is woven of reed and rush and lined with the soft maps of old hands. They pass it around and let each person take one strand and lay it on the earth. Then the stories are braided forward, added without cutting, long enough to reach from the rim to the nearest star, the size of a fingernail. There is the story of the river bride who disappears every spring. The hole, they say, is where she stores her veil. There is the story of the patient king who gave away his days, one by one, until he had only nights to rule. And the hole was his throne, because a throne should be a little lower than the people. There is the story of the girl who baked bread so light it tried to become a cloud and needed to be taught the kindness of staying. The whole taught it by being a bowl, and the bread, grateful for having somewhere to rest, fed everyone twice. People who travel bring their own myths and leave them like pebbles on the rim to keep company with the local stones. A shepherd from the high country speaks of a goat with moonlight in its horns that jumped into the hole when wolves came and jumped back out. As a ladder made of steps you could climb without fear. A woman from the wet valleys talks about eels that swim through earth, as fish swim through water, and have to surface somewhere when the stars change their minds. She thinks the hole is an eel's breathing place, and when you hear a low sound from within, It is not rumbling, but a sigh of a creature that keeps time the way roots keep secrets. A pair of brothers from the far marshes say nothing, but one hums under his breath, while the other listens to the hum bounce softly off the rim. When they get up to leave, they both bow, and the bow feels like an answer. Children make private myths and defend them with the loyalty of sleep. One child believes the hole is where the sky keeps extra blue for emergencies. Another is sure that birds sometimes borrow the opening as a shortcut so their wings can cool down. A third whispers that the hole was made by a careful giant who tipped the plane with a finger to check whether the earth had set properly after dawn. None of these stories is debated. The point of a child's myth is not agreement. It is permission to dream in a shape that can be smoothed if it hardens. To carry a secret as lightly as a feather in a sleeve. Echo games are a tradition that behave like rituals when the mood is right. A person stands just inside the circle, near a stone that leans as if it were listening, and breathes a single word into the hole. The word should be a good word bread, home, river, forgiveness, or a word that has forgotten how to hurt thorn, mistake, distance. The echo returns with a tiny change, a softened edge, a stretched vowel, a patience that feels borrowed from someone kind. People say the hole is a workshop for language, where words are sanded and oiled and sent back into the world to be used more gently. After a round of echo games, the camp speaks a little slower without deciding to. Not every myth points downward. Some rise and hover above the rim, like moths that have learned to trust a lamp. There is the tale of the time fisher who sits by the opening with a line woven from yesterday and a hook hammered from a good idea. The fisher catches mornings never to keep, only to admire and release. If a day comes out tangled, the fisher hums and combs it with a forked twig until the hours lie smooth. The people who love this story the most are the ones who have done a difficult thing and want to believe they can do it again with fewer sharp corners. There is a winter story told in a voice that travels like smoke. The world is a heavy door. It says, and the hole is a hinge, and the plane swings wide into the seasons, because the hinge remembers where to stop. Hinges do not boast. They are content to squeak when there is a need and rest when there is not. The story asks listeners for a hinge-quality heart something that can carry the weight of living without taking credit for opening or closing in the longest nights. When frost writes careful script on stones and breath becomes something you can see leaving and returning, the myths move underground for a while and come back with the smell of root and flint. The hole is a school then, the elders say, for lessons that prefer shadow. One lesson is how to leave quietly. You untie your day from its posts, fold it so the good parts face out, set it at the rim, and walk home by starlight. Another is how to stay. You choose a stone to lean against, and the stone chooses to lean back, and the two of you learn a balanced stillness that could last until a bird finds your shoulder an acceptable branch. Some nights, the whole seems to breathe with the group. When the storyteller pauses, the opening gathers the pause and returns a little more of it, like a lake giving back a reflected moon slightly larger than the original. Everyone feels the added quiet and smiles into it. Not much is needed to feel. At home near a hole that keeps company with silence. A blanket, a cup half full of warm something. A palm against earth dot if the wind comes up hard. Nobody speaks above a murmur. Hard wind is a guest, and a good host does not interrupt a guest who has crossed difficult miles. The myths bend to fit the gusts, telling shorter versions with wider spaces. A favorite in such weather is the two-breath tale of the sleeper who looked into the hole and discovered that sleep was already looking back, ready to carry a person across a night, like a canoe carries a lantern, steady, slow, bright enough, never hurried to shore. The plain cools in slow degrees until the breath of evening feels like a hand on the brow, and the stones around the time hole take their places as if a quiet bell had been rung. The circle does not move, yet it seems to lean toward a certain quarter of the sky, the way a listener leans toward a familiar voice. Long before names were given to constellations, the people who paused here discovered that light and shadow could be trusted to keep the year in order. And so they learned to measure the tender arithmetic of seasons by watching the rim dotted first. The lesson is only a feeling. Dawn rising farther north one morning than the last, the sun taking a slightly different path across the low hills, stars falling into a new procession after midnight, the moon's pale ladder climbing from a different notch in the horizon. Then the feeling becomes a habit, and habit becomes a way to remember. A child is shown how the first light touches the broadest stone at the very beginning of spring, and how, weeks later, the same stone receives that light closer to its shoulder, as if the sky were politely nodding before it walks on. Elders carry simple sticks and smooth pebbles and use them as gentle markers. A stick is pressed into the earth where a sunrise last struck the edge of the hole. A pebble is set where this shadow of the tallest orthostat ended at midday. These do not command the sun or bind the stars. They only make a small agreement with memory. Every few days the sticks are moved, the pebbles adjusted, and the circle becomes a slow clock, ticking in footsteps. Nothing loud is needed. The earth itself keeps time, and the whole merely gives the hand a place to rest while it listens. When the year is new and grass is still bright with cold, the sky at dawn is thin and eager. The watchers gather with breath clouding and mittens smelling faintly of smoke. They stand a little to the east of the rim and keep their shoulders warm by standing near one another. When the sun finally lifts, it threads itself between two stones that have learned to share its passage. The light runs a calm finger along the rim and settles for a moment where a small mark has been cut years ago, almost too shallow to see unless you know its kindness by heart. This is agreement, the sky and the ground finding the same sentence dot at the first long evenings of summer. The whole seems to hold a small pool of gold that refuses to spill. Shadows shrink to small patient shapes. The circle's stones are warm to the touch. The watchers sit rather than stand, and they bring water and seeds and stories, because summer is a generous teacher who lets you learn while your hands are busy. The sun sets farther north than it ever will again, sliding behind the familiar notch, and the last ray touches the opposite side of the rim in a place where the children have been told it must fall if the berries are to ripen on schedule. It falls there, and laughter is saved for morning, so as not to disturb the lesson. Autumn makes its own equal sign. The day and night shake hands across the whole, and the stones are honest witnesses. The watchers arrive with baskets and leave with lists in their minds, written in the soft alphabet of chores. Gather wood, turn stored grain, mind thatch before the first sly frost. They track the lowering sun by the longer shadow of the central, post that may or may not still stand. If it has fallen, a tall staff is set in the old socket, and the shadow behaves as if nothing important is missing. Children trace the shadow's path and compare it to lines cut by older hands. The new line agrees with the old, and a gentle pride moves in the chest like a small, warm animal preparing to sleep. Winter draws the circle inward. The wind is frank now, and the whole looks like ink poured into the ground. Yet this is the season when certainty is a comfort gratefully accepted. The sun chooses a new doorway in the hills, peeking through the farthest window of the year, and the watchers count days to the time when it will turn and admit it has gone as far as it needed to go. On a morning like that, breath is white and the ground rings a little underfoot. The first light pierces the seam between two stones that appear to have been moved, not by force, but by the long persuasion of wishes made in whispers. The people watch in silence as the beam reaches the rim, touches the inner edge, and illuminates one shallow groove cut by an ancestor whose name survives only in patience. The light pauses, then steps away, and everyone feels taller by the height of one calm yes. The moon, being a more complicated friend, earns and receives closer attention. The watchers note where the full moon rises when the wind is from the north, and when it is from the south, how its path leans higher some months and settles humbly in others. They mark with pebbles the places where pale light rests on the stones at the moment the story ends. There is a quiet contest among the elders to predict where the moon will first lay a silver finger on the rim 2 nights from now, and the winner receives the same prize as the rest: respect, amusement, and an extra spoon of warm broth. The children learn that even gentle competitions are lessons braided into comfort. Sometimes the night is clear enough that the Milky Way uses the whole as a bowl and pours itself across the field. The stones seem small then, and nobody minds. The watchers point up and trace slow maps in the air. The crook line that leads to spring, the bent fishhook that turns the river into winter, the small tent of stars that keeps courage company when storms go visiting. They do not need names to keep such pictures. They only need to return at the same hour after the same number of sleeps and look up again together. The sky is a book that turns its own pages because trust is heavy and best lifted by more than one hand dot when clouds prevail and nights hide themselves inside damp wool. The calendar is kept by memory and by the sound of water moving across tools set out to be rinsed by rain. The watchers meet anyway, in a smaller circle under a simple shelter. They draw lines in ash on a flat stone, show how a day's length can be guessed by the space between two little marks on the post. Tell how a shadow at noon can be compared to the size of a thumb drawn out at arm's length. None of this is exact, and that is a relief. The whole teaches them that near is enough. That seasons answer to kindness more quickly than to commands, planting weights for a sign woven from several small proofs. The watchers bow to each one, the dawn that arrives from just beyond the guiding stone, the soil that holds the palm without envy, the evening that keeps a bird's note a little longer than yesterday, the moon that retires later and later, as if to tell the earth it may stretch. Then the baskets open, seed by seed, song by song. Paths are walked along the edges of fields as if tracing the rim of a large companionable bowl, and the whole keeps. Watch without asking to be thanked. When seedlings push up an even army of green, someone leaves a garland of last year's straw on the nearest stone, and it looks like a crown that has chosen to rest. The calendar is also for stories that make sense of weather without shutting the door on wonder. In some tales, the whole is a sleeping mouth of a being too old to remember its last word. In other versions, it is the place where time drinks before traveling on. One story says that each season is a traveler who borrows one of the circles, stones to lean on while lacing a sandal. Another claims the sun keeps a memory inside the hole and retrieves it every solstice like a hidden toy. No one argues with these stories because they make hard work softer and the year feel like a friend with a known way of walking. Migrating animals set their own markers around the circle's edge. The watchers keep notes in the small ledger of habit. Fatter birds in the first week, when the shadow grows as long as a sleeping person. The rust-colored deer crossing the dip in the ridgeline on the third night after a west wind. A chorus of frogs beginning the very evening the moon refuses to show itself. The whole holds these notes quietly, not so much a notebook as a table where everyone knows. They may set things down for a while because someone else will keep an eye on them. Even passing travelers learn to step inside the circle and consult. The stones as if asking a wise neighbor for the time dot. It is tempting to believe the circle commands the heavens, but the watchers learn better and sleep better for learning it. The stones do not order the sky. They invite it to teach. The hole does not create the seasons. It gives them a place to sit beside each other and agree to be understood slowly. Every morning and evening measured here becomes a bead on a string that can reach across years without breaking. When a year is harsh, the string is tied tighter. When a year is generous, the string is relaxed enough to fit 2 wrists. The small mistakes of the calendar are forgiven in the same spirit that bread dough is forgiven for needing more flour, or a door for swelling in the rains. If a shadow misses, the mark by the width of 2 fingers, the watchers smile at the twins of chance and try again tomorrow. If the dawn chooses a slightly different seam between the hills, the circle accepts the new stitch and lets the cloak of time sit a little differently on its shoulder. The important thing is not grandeur. It is continuity, the promise that the ground will make sense quietly if asked gently. When visitors arrive from far fields, they bring their own measures and are invited to lay them alongside the circles. Words for months and winds change as the baskets and hands change, but everyone recognizes the way a stone drinks light and pours it back as shadow. There are many ways to keep a year, and the whole is modest enough to accept company. Evening spreads across the prehistoric field, and the cold patience of stone circles begins to emerge from the dusk. Around the mysterious time hole, scattered stones slowly reveal their order, deliberate, careful, as if placed to match the rhythm of ancient hearts. There is a sense that at some time long before memory, people chose this spot not just to marvel, but also to build that picture, the earliest builders, a line of figures moving calmly through mist and grass. Their hands are strong and practiced, their voices low and friendly. The construction work is a communal act. Planning first, elders tracing rough circles or spirals in the earth. Then quarrying, small teams seeking out the right stones, judging weight and grain. The quarry songs are quiet more for patience than for pace. Children watch, collecting smaller rocks and learning the value of patience and care from the adults. When the stones arrive, they are hauled across the stubborn soil. Using timber sledges, rope crafted from grass and bark, sometimes wooden rollers, but often simple shoulder and will. Each stone is greeted, padded, sometimes painted with ochre or charcoal. The circle slowly takes shape as the stones are leaned into shallow trenches or set upright against the earth itself. Their wider faces are turned inward, a sensible alignment. For stability, and if one listens to tradition, for shelter from the wind, and support for potential timber lintels above. These efforts require careful cooperation. Planning falls to wise architects and elders. Quarrying is a task for skilled laborers. Transportation for those who know the land. Laying foundations is led by masons and surveyors. And general construction brings together every hand, young or old, to help raise the forms. Rituals and celebrations often follow each phase, a gentle dance of gratitude for each stone set, a story told as the perimeter grows, quieter music as the night deepens. Nearby, daily routines continue. Food is prepared, fires burn low, and baskets are woven against stone. Weaving circles in grass or creating clay pots becomes a comfort around the site. Evidence that the mystery at the center is not the only story worth telling. Bread is baked, skins are tanned, and children play. At the rim of safety, the ancient people are neither hurried nor troubled. They accept slow progress because the work itself is as much ceremony as construction. Some construction methods rely on dry stone stacking without mortar. Stones fit by weight and touch, the press of the hand and eye guiding each move. Sometimes wooden posts and woven brush provide windbreaks, and collapsed circles hint at past timber roofs that have rotted away, leaving stones as silent witnesses. At times, the building is rebuilt after rains, after frost, after the shifting of the ground. Each repair is a moment for the community to gather and remember that the mystery belongs to everyone. Around the time hole itself, odd features gradually grow. Low cairns, small stone piles, perhaps a mound or barrow. The uses are as vague as the stories. Some say tomb, some say marker, some say nothing at all. Stone circles with aligned posts and lintels sometimes mark a celestial event, solstice sunrise or equinox moonrise, though nobody is hurried to confirm. The ground is dug gently, each layer kept cool and calm, and the structure is permitted to serve whatever purpose time chooses. As dusk turns to night, the stones take on new meaning in the shifting shadows. Their presence is less commanding than inviting. A group can gather inside, sitting in the uncluttered enclosure, their backs warmed by earth, their faces cooled by the night. Stories and gentle rituals happen in the slow space at the center. Some believe this setting is for ceremony. Others, for simple protection. No consensus exists among archaeologists regarding the intended function. Some believe the structures allowed for gatherings, rituals, or marking of important events. Others suggest burial, shelter, or even storytelling by star and stone. All agree, though, that the creation of these monuments required remarkable social organization and a willingness to work together in quiet freedom. A child might walk the circle, counting stones, 20, 40, sometimes more. An elder may sit by the biggest rock, tracing a spiral with a fingertip in the dust. A visitor may pause outside, listening for echoes, wondering if the shadow of time will speak. Always the stones wait, they rest in the grass, holding their position and their gentle mystery, as if inviting every future moment to add its own layer. When the night is coldest, the circle feels like a shelter, a slow barrier against the limitless unknown. Sleep comes at the center, surrounded by stones and shadows that keep watch without judging. The grass bends softly at the edges. The people rest knowing the hole and its ring are not just relics, but companions markers of a shared, patient effort to understand the world and, perhaps in dreams, travel through its mysteries with care. As dusk deepens near the prehistoric time hole, the world grows quiet and charged. Shadows lengthen, flickering in the grass. Soon, gentle figures gather at the rim in a circle: youth, elders, ordinary families pulled by the old gravitational mystery. Here, edge and void call out for ritual, and the answer is a series of ceremonies so slow and so careful that sleep itself seems the rhythm behind every motion. Some come bearing offerings: smooth river stones, bits of bone, bundles of herbs, a tuft of animal fur. They arrange the gifts in patterns around the hole. Sometimes a ring, sometimes a spiral, always mindful not to disturb the ancient order. Nobody rushes. The offerings mark not urgency but patience, a hope that some part of the earth hears and remembers gratitude. The fire tender raises dry twigs at the circle's arc. A low flame is coaxed from patient hands, casting gentle orange on the old stones and filling the air with the scent of moss and ash. The fire's crackle becomes a lullaby, wrapping each listener, blending with the hush of distant owls and the old soft sweep of wind. There are stories in every ember, every flicker, every shadow that dances across the grass. Children play on the edge, watched closely. Their games are slow, respectful. One dares to toss a pebble into the hole, then listens for the sound, no matter how small, of ancient secrets stirred. Parents remind them softly to stay near, reciting the old bedtime lore. The hole is not for answers, only for gentle questions. At the threshold of sleep, a child might dream of climbing in, returning in morning, changed, wiser, or simply embraced by mystery. As the night matures, the circle sings. The melody is old, half remembered, half made up, weaving hope and care into each note. Some strike bone on stone as a gentle percussion, never rowdy, only enough for the spirits beneath to find their own rhythm. Voices drift out toward the sky in threads that seem to tie the dark to the gentle flicker of the hole. Sometimes, at solstice or full moon, the ceremonies grow a little, and families gather from beyond the low hills. The circle widens, fires multiply for warmth, and elders whisper the most careful tales, how the hole might be a gate or a timekeeper, or just a good place to rest. Sometimes they walk in slow processions, circling the hole sunwise or moonwise, counting their steps, quietly reciting names of those who have come before, and why each one mattered. The ritual is repeated over generations, becoming the world's soft memory instead of its hard history. Herbs and animal bones often bear. Skulls, shank bones, or horn are set aside and combined as tokens. Bare bones especially, arranged carefully in rows or circles, seem to enact ancient magic or promise. The idea is not to conquer, but to ask, not to demand, but to offer. Sometimes a part of a herd, and sometimes a whole animal, is given. To the whole, as if what goes into darkness might return as plenty in future years. A gentle dance, never hurried, never loud often circles the rim. Shadows move in step with the nighttime wind, arms up in slow homage to the stars. The dance is not for show, but for harmony. It is a way for the body to say to the landscape, I will not disturb you. I will learn your patience. Children, if the moon is right and the storyteller's generous, may be gently guided to touch the ground at the hole's edge with a soft hand or a bent knee. It's not a rite of passage, but a blessing, a moment of quiet hope that the child's. Curiosity becomes kindness, and the earth keeps them safe. Afterwards, they return to the fireside, cradled and sung to sleep. The night grows deeper, and the music fades to a single voice, sometimes an elder, sometimes the wind, sometimes the silence itself. Bread is shared, water is passed around. Pieces of painted stone are set beside the fire and spoken over, their motifs half abstract, half animal, just clear enough to anchor dreams not ours pass gently. Some offer prayers for health, for new life, for the end of suffering, always quietly, and usually to the earth itself. Others recount spells for luck, calls for rain, hopes that the whole might be a threshold between days. But the real magic is in the repetition. Every year, every season, the same slow ceremony, the same circle in the grass, the same belief that mystery is best cared for by sleep and story dot as the circle thins. Some step out into the cool air, walking home along trodden paths. Others linger, lost in the gentle trance, lulled by the fire's glow and the slow hum of unseen time. The time hole never gives answers, but it welcomes the ceremony. Its purpose remains a mystery, but its effect is undeniable, a gathering, a peace and a sleep deeper than what daylight ever brings. The last flame flickers out and the whole returns, to shadow holding every song, every hope, every gift and prayer. In the quiet afterward, the grass remembers where the circle sat, and the wind brings new stories for tomorrow's rituals. Sleep settles on the plain, gentle, slow, and full, of unanswered questions perfectly suited for dreams. Dusk settles over a lonely prehistoric plain, and the hush feels older than language itself. A faint, cool wind pushes through the grass, making the tall stalks whisper secrets that belong to the first people, the ones who arrived here without maps or names for what they saw. The mysterious time hole, low, round, and marked by silent stones, lies half sunk in ancient soil, ringed by rocks that once stood prouder but now lean and rest. Nobody knows what happened here first, or why this place was chosen for a feature so strange, so patient, so entirely unexplained. Imagine Paleolithic hunter-gatherers skin warmed by fires long gone, approaching with a mixture of wonder and caution. The air thickens near the rim, as if time itself lingered longer, waiting for the next story or the next night. The ground carries thousands of years of footsteps, each one pressed into clay and grass with questions. Who made this and what? Did they see? At the edge, stones fleck with moss, and odd prehistoric carvings, simple lines. Animal shapes, spiral marks sketch the last traces of sun. Every fragment of the site is a sentence from the past, but the grammar is lost. Their meanings are guessed, never known. The time hole itself is a shadowed depression, wide at its mouth and narrowing into some unseen depth, a pit, a corridor, a space that taps a quiet rhythm underneath the field. It might have been a tomb, a hideaway, a portal, or a marker for a ritual we cannot recover. Some pits found in prehistoric archaeological sites are circular, some square, some with steps leading carefully down. Whispers abound about arch, corridors, and chambers roofed with birch and hay, but the explanations grow quieter the closer you listen. Around the opening, ancient post holes signal the ghosts of lost superstructures, maybe thatched roofs, maybe woven shades, maybe nothing at all, but a hope for comfort. Rain has painted and repainted this land for centuries with soft, persistent strokes. The sun has hardened the upper crust and left cool moisture below. Every season brings a change to the whole. Summer animal tracks pressed into the soft rim, winter ice gathering without opinion, spring floods whispering secrets in the low ground. Grass grows taller every year, bending to look into the darkness, as if even the plants wish to know what lies within. The first human hands to touch this ground came for all manner of reasons: find shelter, dig for roots, mistake the hole as a den or danger, gather water or rest. Over generations, the hole became part of their lives, a feature too ordinary to notice, then suddenly too strange to ignore. Parents told children not to wander too close after dusk. Wise elders recounted half-remembered myths as stars appeared above. Sometimes the hole was a comfort in its constancy, other times a warning that not all shadows can be named. A hunter, patient as the wind, would edge near the rim and sit, listening for the movements that do not belong to animals, or perhaps belong to a kind no longer seen. A gatherer might toss a pebble inside, measure its fall, and find the sound subtly wrong. Some found peace here, some never returned. At the center of the mystery is time measured by footsteps, by seasons, by the slow movement of the earth's surface, by the quiet persistence of not knowing. Archaeologists looking back now find layers where generations camped near the mysterious pit, low stone walls thrown together against the wind, lean to shelter fires from mistral gusts or monsoon rains. Remnants of animal skin, birch bark, and fragile wooden posts speak to fragile. Tents or huts, circles and squares, drawn by a mind that measured comfort against exposure. Sometimes there are ovens made of stone set at the edges, sometimes in the center, sometimes with nobody left to explain. Tools split beach stones, rough axes, picks de terra ameda, and hand-picked scrapers collected in dunes above the hole-marked days of labor, of preparation, of repetition. Each tool tells two stories, one practical, one uncertain, as every scrape of stone might have been routine or ritual. They are reminders that people did not come here expecting answers, but built meaning from what the earth suggested. As night presses on, the edge of the hole becomes a place for slow ritual, a circle, drawn from habit more than intention. Fires sputter and calm, the stones warm from below. The smoke rises and finds the evening sky. 20, sometimes 40, could gather here, sharing stories, bread, and comfort in the hush that draws tightly around mysterious places. Maybe they spoke about the stars, about the path of animals, about seasons carried in wind and water. But maybe most of all, they waited for the whole to explain itself in dreams or omens, waited for morning to return everything to the ordinary. In the deepest night, the time hole is not frightening or fierce, but patient and stubborn. Its mystery is not sharp. It is gentle, more a feature of the background than a challenge. Footsteps in the grass come and go. The stones keep their memories quietly. Far away, a lone owl calls for another, and the field absorbs all sounds slowly. No drama here. Only the vast, soft patience of the prehistoric world, and the sleep that comes from knowing some questions do not need to be answered to let the mind rest. Before dawn, the shadows in the hole thicken and blend with the sky. The first light creeps gently, not probing, but accepting, not solving, but giving enough comfort that another day can begin. The prehistoric people awaken, stretch, remember their camp and their stories, and glance at the hole one more time. It remains unchanged, waiting without hurry, an old friend, an unsolved riddle, a place where the slow victory of sleep overtakes every mystery. As the sun rises and birds call out across the plain, the time hole becomes less a puzzle and more a silent companion to the world's beginnings. The air is gentle, the grass forgiving, the stones warm with memory. The past rests here, folded simply into earth and sky, ready for another chapter and another gentle sleep.